Hello, everyone. So Justin is a guy who loves to go out and look for sea turtles in the evening, and in the morning, you can see him with sharks. He's actually a venture scout for startup accelerators. He has helped leading companies like Alchemist Accelerator and Amazon Web Services. What he does is goes out and finds the best startups in healthcare, space, satellites, and we'll touch upon this one, and other technical areas. I met him through our common friend Melissa while I was on a trip to Puerto Rico, and help me if I did not pronounce that correctly. He's a great guy, and I'm sure you're going to love this podcast. Welcome to the show, Justin. How are you?
Doing good, yeah. Thank you. It's really fun to be here. You caught me at a very interesting time in my life where I'm trying to start another company, trying to
Really?
explore different hobbies. And I live in Puerto Rico, as you mentioned, and
Yeah,
there's just so many outdoor things here to do. And it feels like I'm 30 now, but it seems like as I get older, I'm getting more adventurous and more interested in outdoor hobbies and physical pursuits. So I feel like maybe I'm doing things a little backwards than what I expected, but I'm loving it so far. So yeah, it's been an interesting time.
perfect, perfect. I think we have at least two episodes between us at the very least. But let's start with your day job. So you were a venture, and then we'll come upon the company that you're about to start soon. But let's talk about being a venture scout for startup accelerators. What does a venture scout do, and how did you get started into this?
Yeah, my path towards everything is pretty atraditional, and this one is kind of wacky. So,
Hmm.
my background was in biology, but I had a bunch of different areas within my degree. So, my degree was really like a minor in physics, chemistry, biology. It was like I knew a little about a lot, you know.
Okay.
But I did some wet lab science studying protists, and I studied aging or the genetics of aging. But I could not see myself like looking at a screen for 8 hours. But I got to learn how to code. I got to learn how to just how science is done, how to at least pursue a paper. I never actually published my research. What came to a dead end, which is pretty interesting in its own right, but I won't go down that path right now. So I knew all these little things about tech and science, and but during this time is when all the startup boom was happening. Y
Mhm.
Combinator had come out in like 2009. This was right after
Mhm.
the financial collapse, which I didn't really understand even as a college student. But things were just changing so fast in front of my eyes, and all these big tech companies were emerging. So and the startups were having this really sexy name, and people were playing ping pong at work, and compared to my friends and their parents who were doing 9 to 5 jobs and stuck at a cubicle all day, I was like, whoa, I didn't even know this world was a thing. So I went to St. Louis, Missouri. I had some connections there, started working for a startup. I literally just walked in and was like, I kind of need a job. And there was this weird period where they were like, is this guy employed here? Is he just volunteering? And I basically worked for free for a month, and they
Wow.
offered me a job. And it was like, I think I was the first non-engineering hire, but there was a few executives who weren't engineers either. But anyways, I got to work really close with the whole process because I was, right next to the CEO, got to see how fundraising worked, legal contracts, sales, engineering. So I just kind of learned like how startups really work and got to live and breathe that experience, even though I wasn't a founder. But about 4 years into that, I realized this was not for me. I was kind of like in a little bit, I kind of had this moment where I'm like, I think I'm pretty depressed and I didn't know what to do with my life. So I just booked a one-way flight to Hawaii. And started working remotely for the same company out there. That went horribly. I was the only remote employee at a startup in Missouri.
And
Like
which year
nobody
was
envied
this?
me. This was like 2017, I think, or
Okay,
18. I'm kind of blanking on that specific, but
sure.
all of that's important because then I started looking for sort of my next step, and I'd interviewed at a lot of startups. And then I found Alchemist Accelerator, and I found this job working for the managing director and the founder of that company, which had been around for about 8 years at the time. And he just needed like a generalist. He needed help with sales. His brain's kind of wacky too, so he needed someone who could just put up with him too, because
Mhm.
he's such a kind of an eccentric dude, which makes him interesting but can be hard to work with, but in a good way.
Sure.
And he liked my background because they invest into everything from boring SaaS companies that are doing cool things but aren't really exciting to talk about, like optimizing logistics or a supply chain, all the way
Okay.
up to companies trying to build GPS systems for the moon. So he needed somebody who just had an interest, wanted to know a little bit about everything and not necessarily become an expert in any domain. So that background that I had, I think, was really the important part, and that's how I sort of
So
landed at Alchemist.
when you so great journey so far, but when you landed at Alchemist Accelerator, what was your mindset at that time?
I was a little scared because this company had such a big brand,
Yeah.
and I didn't feel like I still had imposter syndrome. I was getting tossed into, I mean, part of this was because my boss was wanted out of certain parts of his job so bad that he was just throwing me in the, in this, I don't even know how to say it, in the war zone. I remember my second week on the job, he put me in a room with a VP of venture capital at a large corporation, a telecom. Um, and he's like, go pitch Alchemist. And I remember being there like, dude, I don't even know what like common stock means. And now I'm pitching to this VP. He's like, you'll be fine. If we don't get this client, it's not a big deal. He's like, just do it. And I just remember being across that table in
Yeah.
my like poorly fitted slacks and this watching this like man in this like perfectly tailored suit grill me on questions about equity and startup. And I'm just sitting there like, I'll be honest with you, dude, I don't know anything what you're saying. I'm just here to tell you it's a good company, whatever that means. So I was scared. I mean, I was definitely was trying to learn a lot, but it was a trial by fire, and I
Yeah.
definitely had so much anxiety.
Wow. I cannot imagine doing that. But this was 5 years ago.
Yeah, around that time.
Five,
It was
4 or 5.
2023. Yeah, around 2018. Yeah.
Yeah. So you weren't able to make probably the best pitch of why was not the best company at that time. But tell us, like the past 5 years, well, what have they been like? What have been some of the notable successes um, in your role, or some maybe some misses, which
Yeah,
you
I can.
wish?
I can ramble about like personal ones and sort of the startup. So
Yeah.
there's been some great startups that have come out of Alchemist that I'm a big fan of, and I can't say I won't take like personal success in them. Um, there's just companies that either I know or I've helped get into the program, but companies like Ingflow, which people can look into that if they want. They're more of on the remote code execution side, which probably is jargon. Basically, it's two really senior people from Google who decided to spin out what they were working on at Google and build it into its own standalone product to help developers build their code much faster. Basically, the idea is if you're sitting there as a developer and you have to run your code, to build that code can take a lot of time. So
Mm,
this software essentially parses it up, and then you can do like remote execution and speed up your build times. It just drastically cuts down the time it takes for a software engineer to build to actually test and run their code. Um, and that's a kind of a boring area if you're not in the weeds on that, but it's kind of one of those areas that I personally love because
mhm.
it's sort of like when you're in a
It just cuts
city.
down on the development time, right?
Yeah, exactly. And it's really boring to talk about it, but like it's one of those things where it's like if you can increase that speed, all of the software that everyone uses every day
Mm,
dramatically gets better. We'll just never know it was because of them. So something
mm,
like that was pretty cool. And
okay.
then personally, I would say my happiest achievement was we raised 2 million from Volvo. And when we did that, we triggered an investment from Siemens, which was 1.4 million. Technically, their VC arm, which is a different name, but I'm just going to say Siemens because no one knows the name of the VC arm. So that was big because then we could launch our European hub.
Mm,
And this was all happening right around the pandemic. So venture capital firms were freezing their budgets. Well, not venture capital firms, corporate venture capital firms. Venture capital firms were dropping cash left and right, but corporate arms were freezing money. So it was a 1 year process to get 3.4 million raised, which was not that much money, but it was so difficult to get corporate people who were still willing to invest in the scene when the
mm,
pandemic, people weren't sure. This was pre every stock going
yeah.
up 200%. This was when no one was sure if the world was ending. So everybody was tightening up their piggy banks, and yeah, it was a crazy time.
It's interesting that you say that because how does the macroeconomic outlook affect these companies today? And we're in July 2023.
The startups.
Yeah.
Ooh, I mean, ooh, that's such a hard question. It changes for every single one because the world pivots.
Mm,
So certain industries are immune to these types of things. Like right now, generative AI has all of the focus of VC.
right.
Blockchain probably too, and digital health. They'll always have, their niches too. But right now, generative AI, everybody's trying to figure out how do you leverage this tech for their product. It's
Yeah.
very much reminds me of the machine learning name drops back in like 2015, where every startup was trying, or 2017, where every startup was like, we have AI, and it's like, what does that mean? But this one's a little bit more tangible.
Yeah.
But it depends on the company. During the pandemic, budgets shifted towards digital health because of COVID,
Sure.
and remote collaboration tools. Now, remote collaboration tools and many other sectors have just taken valuation hits. Um, yeah, it totally depends on where you're building in.
But then, so you mentioned blockchain. What are some, and you work in that space, right? So what are some, go
We
ahead.
we
You're about to
yeah,
say,
Oh no, I was just gonna say kind of. I have always had this personal fascination with blockchain, not because I necessarily actually thought I thought Bitcoin was noble and like super visionary, but I,
hmm
I didn't really think it would ever I didn't really understand why it worked or excuse me, why it would work in terms of like
hmm
the in practical environment. Though I also in hindsight realized some of the errors in my like how I came to those judgments and why they were so wrong, mostly because I was so short-sighted on things,
hmm
and didn't really think about yeah, anyways. So I got involved in that. I read the white paper in 2011, which was I think a few years after it came out, and
Okay.
was like, "Whoa, this is crazy." It's a very short white paper. The math is complicated, but if you like spend some time, you can kind of figure out like, "Oh yeah, I understand why this is so brilliant." But who's going to use this? And I didn't understand. I never even asked the question, what was money? Like in my world, money has existed since humans came onto the scene.
Right.
You just sort of think that. And the reason I got interested in a little bit more was I always found it really annoying when I started coding at 2008 that that we've had email and text messaging for decades.
Mm,
And if I have a text message client or if I have an email client, I don't need to know or care what you're doing on your side. I just need your email address or your phone number, and I can
mm,
send you information. And I thought that was so cool. And then as Apple and Google progressed in their own little landscapes, all of a sudden I was like, wait a minute, I can't send a text to Apple, and Apple can't, like, what? Like, and I can't send
Just
an
locked
I
in their
you
ecosystem.
just locked into these ecosystems, and I'm like, we're going backwards, and the world is just like they're kind of just like zombie walking towards whatever platform, and I'm like, whoa, like this is. I mean, it's fine, but in my world, it felt so wrong that we were just like creating these technology like chambers, even though we had
Mm,
all the tech since like 1995 to do this right. So that didn't blockchain wasn't necessarily going to solve that, but when Ethereum came out and was trying to make a general compute engine and
mhm,
let a ecosystem kind of build it, it was simply just it was just open source, but the open source movement has always had issues with generating money. So these tools have always existed in open source areas, but like nobody knew how to pay the developers. No one knew how to actually make money from these open source projects because everyone just downloaded for free and not pay.
mm.
So blockchain was just kind of like, oh, you guys are open source and you're trying to build an economy around the open source project so people can make salaries and make livings. I don't really understand the economy piece, but I get the philosophy and like why that makes so much sense and why it's worth trying. And it reminded me, okay, go ahead.
So all of this you found out in 2011, 2012 when you read the white paper for Bitcoin.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, I'll give you the timeline. So 2011 is when I read Bitcoin. I
Yeah.
think it was around there, and I was like, "This is cool, but I don't think this makes sense." I'm also still not a big fan of Bitcoin, but I think
Okay.
it's really cool. Like I think it deserves to
As a
go down in
concept, it's
history.
amazing.
Yeah, it deserves to go down in history as like the light is like next to the light bulb in my opinion. It is
Yeah.
so awesome. But it was V1, and I just
Mm,
think we need a V2, or Bitcoin needs to start innovating in a couple different areas. And I'm not alone in this. This is actually just got called out at a big conference in Ethereum Barcelona, where one of the co-founders of Ethereum and a few of the core Bitcoin devs have sort of been promoting this. We need to start innovating on Bitcoin. It's just sort of this stagnant
mm.
payment only chain. Anyways, I read the Ethereum white paper. I think Ethereum came out in 2014, and I read it in like 2016. And that's when the blockchain world clicked for me once I understood, like, yeah, if you just have a general compute ledger, then anybody could build payments, people could build art, people could build whatever they wanted.
Right.
And even more important is people can decide what they build. And that was kind of cool knowing that really smart and like creative people could build on top of a product. Those realizations came between like 2016 and 2020, and that was really where I started to get into investing too. Though, quick word here is do not let your understanding of technology get in the way of your investment strategy. Those two cross over and do not correlate sometimes.
I was gonna say that. So what is stopping? So they definitely had their moment, are still maybe kind of still there, not written off. Some people see Bitcoin as a deflationary form of currency. Um, Firstly, walk us through the process, right? So how do the coins, Bitcoin, Litecoin, how do they differ from Ethereum? In what sense? What are some of the practical applications that we could be using today, but we have not?
So just like at a high level, payments work so great on crypto.
Hmm.
I guess if you're in the United States, you haven't lived the problem where if you, well, you kind of have. Like you have a company like PayPal that owns Venmo, but yet
Mm,
you can't send USD between PayPal and Venmo.
right.
Like that is absurd for like the USD is the leading currency globally, and we can't exchange it without having the same application in our own borders. Like that is like such
Mm,
a crappy technological solution for 2023.
right.
We literally can talk to AI bots now and have them respond, but we can't send USD between to pay for dinner. That's absurd. Um, and you can do that already with crypto, and it's very there's some big flaws that I can really go into. Like I'm for all the things I love about crypto, I think I understand some of the crucial areas that are keeping it from mass adoption, and they're not secrets. Like the core developers of these protocols know these hiccups, but the payment systems work amazing. So I sent money to my friend in Romania. We met up in England one time. We sat down, we had dinner. He said, hey, how much money was it? And in literally 15 seconds, I could send him money, and I didn't have to care what wallet he had, what app he had. He
Mm,
just said, give me $15, and I could send it to him. And that was awesome. So that's one area that I think just makes total sense. I also think just like digital ownership makes a lot of sense. I'm not personally a collector. I don't care about collecting things. But I grew up with Pokemon cards. I grew up around video games. You go over to people's houses, they collect random things like bottles or makeup, or I mean, everybody seems to be a collector,
mm,
at least in the societies that I grew up in. And the fact that you go online and see the same behavior, but people don't have ownership of these products, I I could just see like, oh yeah, this makes sense. People are going to want to own their digital art. Like I've played video games enough where people cherish their in-game items. Like they love their character skins or their outfits. And I don't get it, but I can at least like see it. I'm like, yeah, why wouldn't you want to own the thing that you bought? Like that makes just makes sense.
Right.
I don't
Yeah.
know. Yeah.
What are some enterprise solutions for this?
This one I'm actually a little bit weaker in, because I do not focus on enterprise blockchain. I don't
Okay.
really understand. I mean, I could take a big leap at some of the things that make sense, but I don't know if they're practical. Like, for example, just the obvious one. I think medical data in some shape or form should be on some. You don't need blockchain for this, by the way.
Right. Yeah.
In some shape or form, it should be though in a standard protocol that can be shared across systems.
You're right.
Do you need blockchain for that? No, but blockchain at least has built up a system and a culture where that's the norm. So I
Hmm.
think it's a good contender. I don't think we're near that anytime soon, but I could see a future where if you had enough resources at a blockchain company to build this out and acquire the right clients, they could start some sort of a big product there. I don't think that's in the near term though, and I also don't know if I don't know if blockchain 10 years from now is drastically different than blockchain today, and I think it probably will
Really?
be. Yeah, and I'm not, because the concept that I really care about is just a shared ledger
Hmm.
and an open set of rules so that anybody can build on top of that. Do we need a blockchain to do it? Maybe, maybe not. There's other proposals out there, and there's already active things that look very much different than Ethereum that are alive today. I'm blanking on some of the names, but yeah, these chains are looking very different from one another.
So how do you kind of differentiate in your head between these as great concepts, great for, hopefully mass adoption, versus on a more tactical level of how do I personally invest in this? And by the way, not financial advice, just talking headlines over here. So how do you view these as investment pieces?
Yeah. So the first one is you can think of my primary strategy apart from my technical interests, just my idea of how I thought I could make money was you don't necessarily need to build, you don't have to understand crypto. Like, let's zoom out even further than blockchain. My
Okay.
friend the other day asked me, how do I invest in the crypto? And I was like, well, it's not that hard. You can go to Coinbase and it's a normal cap gains. Like, it's very easy to set up your wallet and do this stuff and buy some. But I was like, you don't even have to do that. Like, you can just go to your stock trading app. And if you're like, I think crypto is interesting, I don't really want to do much, you could just maybe buy like a stock exchange, like Coinbase.
Yeah.
Because if crypto goes through the roof and it's going to be the next big thing, any stock that has exposure to that asset is going to go up too.
Sure.
So you could kind of indirectly invest into crypto by just buying Coinbase stock if you wanted to. Um, but then if you go a layer deeper, my philosophy was simply, put money where you see developers and where you're seeing a platform that provides just sort of services. It's sort of like instead of investing into a specific app on the Apple Store, just invest into Apple because they'll
Sure.
benefit from the whole ecosystem. Now, that's not a great analogy because Apple has 100 other products that aren't involved in apps, and so does Google. But if you could, just being theoretical, if you could
Sure.
just invest into the Google Play Store or the Apple App Store, that's sort of like investing directly into Ethereum or to Bitcoin or to Solana or whatever your
Yeah.
blockchain solution is. These are platforms, and if any application on that platform is a mass success, the head platform, the platform that enabled that, like Ethereum, will benefit from that success. So that was my strategy. It just
Yeah.
made sense to me to reduce risk. Because if not, this is an extremely volatile market, and yeah, you'll be giving yourself a headache if you try to chase everything.
Yeah. Definitely. Have you? Well, I was going to dive a little bit deeper into the like maybe technical analysis of some coins and if you do that or not, but let's kind of stay away from that.
Yes,
Anything.
yeah.
uh, is this something that is pursued by your company or is this more on a personal level?
It's more on a personal level. There is a little anarchy in me, and I have always appreciated the little anarchist movement
Sure.
within crypto. Which is not to say it's an anarchist movement as crypto, but there are sort of these subsectors that had to do that to kind of get it out of the gate. And I do love the idea of the best way I like to explain crypto is actually without crypto. I like to just like compare it to language. Language for all the wonders that it's done. It's kind of crazy that we don't have a universal language. We don't have a single rule book for how language evolves,
Hmm.
and it's kind of crazy that when you're born into this world, everybody is taught how to speak. At least in certain parts, obviously, taught how to speak, taught how to read, taught how to write, using this one set of rules that is kind of different based on what subsector of culture you're in. Like if you're in New York, you're going to learn it a little bit differently than if you grew up in Florida.
Hmm.
But yet we can all communicate, and it works well enough. And then what's crazy is that new words and words can get removed and added based on little movements around the globe. Like a new
Hmm.
popular artist can inject a whole bunch of new vocabulary into
Sure.
the language, and it can kind of just grow on its own. And what's really cool about it is that like even if like half the United States got wiped out, um, the language could sort of rebuild, or excuse me, if like almost everybody got wiped out, the language could rebuild itself. It would probably
Hmm.
look a little different because the
Right.
teachers would teach it. Anyways, this is to say that I loved that style a lot, and it reminded me a lot of what's happening in blockchain, where you have these individual people who are saying, can we just find ways to build these systems, these communication systems online? They're not English. It's going to be how computers talk to each other.
Mm.
How can we build like a computer language that's open source and let developers from all over the world contribute to that and shape its culture? So I do this with Alchemist. We have invested into a few blockchain companies. One was acquired called Utrust Payments. A couple of the other ones, I'm not sure how well they're doing, but I can't say my personal interest is in those ideas. I'm much more fascinated about around these grassroots movements from developers who are really excited to just help each other. And I've seen it happen so many times where a really big developer is building a project and they'll tweet out and say, "Hey, this part of the process sucks. I can't get this information." And two or three developers will hop in a room for a weekend and build a tool. Like they're not trying to build an empire. They're not trying to
Right.
build $1 billion company. They're just trying to build something that's practical and helpful, and I
Sure.
love that. We would never invest into that though, because venture only cares about investments that can make large returns. We're not going to invest into three kids who say we're just building this to be useful. But I personally like that more.
Sure.
So I'm at odds here, and this is why I've slowly been kind of stepping away from venture because I think I don't know if it's blockchain that's the future, but that mindset of building useful tools over
Hmm.
empires is way more appealing to me. If does that make sense?
Absolutely, absolutely. And we want to talk about the mindset, but I understand that we're coming towards the end of this episode, so we'll can we save that for the next one?
Yeah, absolutely. I can't
In the
believe we're already at 40
meantime,
minutes.
in the meantime, are you allowed to talk about your company, your startup?
I don't even want to call it a startup.
Ah,
I'm gonna call it a boring old company. I won't talk about it too much yet, but
okay.
because I'm exploring a couple different products within, and
Sure.
if I talk about one product now, it could be totally different tomorrow. But essentially, I just noticed there's a lot of opportunity in Puerto Rico. It's not that large of a place, but there's 1 to 2 million people here. I just looked and like, for example, the cruise ship records say that in the next month and a half, there's going to be 90,000 people coming off cruise ships.
Okay.
If you look at that over the course of the year, it's huge. So there's a lot of influx here, and there's a lot of services that just don't exist in Puerto Rico for, I would say, a lot of geopolitical reasons, which are super sad, but I won't go into that right now. So there's just like a lot of opportunity here to do basic things to help basic things in Puerto Rico. So I'm
Yeah.
exploring a bunch of those avenues, and that's everything from helping people find events or restaurants to tours to just making a tool that is extremely practical for someone who's coming to Puerto Rico or lives in Puerto Rico to find something that they want to do.
Okay.
My starry-eyed version is I would just love to help people get outside. I don't care what that is. If that's walking around, if that's going out to do something cool, adventurous, I just want to help people get outside and do things. I don't really
Yeah.
care what it is.
Okay. Um, Man, so I was in for our viewers, I was in Puerto Rico earlier this year. Absolutely loved that territory. I had a blast over there, and talking about adventures, I had a lot of adventures there. How about this, Justin? So let's talk more about why you chose to go to Puerto Rico after that few months in Hawaii. Maybe not right after, but your journey to Puerto Rico, how the life has been over there, how your mental models, some of the mindset shifts have happened in the last few years that you've been there. Would love to do that for episode number two.
Yeah, that'd be
But
great.
yeah, but for this one, thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. This was great.
Yeah.